Hi everyone, welcome back to another SimplePlanes video. In this video, I'll be showing you what the variable system is and how you can use it. So, let's get started. That is not what I was intending to be loaded. Anyways, this is the engine for the SWL120, well, one of two. Well, this is the one engine. I'm just going to copy it, change a bit of code. It has a few details. It has some rivets here, which is a bunch of dots and some text. I have a random open hatch here, which doesn't do anything. It's just an inlet, but it's actually a hollow fuselage, but it's just intending to be a hatch or something. Then there's some random markings. This is actually the hazard area of when the engine is running. And there's some text here. Some other random things that I found on an image of an engine in real life, so I put them in here. And actually, I'm just going to load this. I have modified the insides of the engine as well. So, also with the new 1.12 update, which hasn't really added much, just some virtual reality stuff, the sounds have had a slight overhaul, which means the engine is now really loud, so I had to modify a bit of it, and it's still really loud. Good thing I can split the audio and microphone tracks in my recording software and editing software, because I will not be able to hear myself speak when I turn this thing on. I'll just talk about what I've added so you can see. I'll be able to talk and mute it anyway. So these veins or something back here, they are actually part of the structural elements of the engine, of how the outer cowling or casing is held on. And then with the reverse thrust, I've added some things that open. I'm not sure how to describe it, but you'll see it when I'm running it. So I'm just going to start the engine up now. And they, along with, I'm just going to start the engine up now. So when I activate the reverse thrust, there's these veins, actually not, look like guide veins or something. And they, along with these flap things here, direct all the bypass air from the front fan back this way, or they do in like real life, but in SimplePlanes that doesn't work because this fan does not provide any thrust. Actually, I think what provides thrust is like the engine core thing that I'm using in this engine. And so how it was to work in SimplePlanes is there'll be like another small engine here that's modded, and then they'll overcome the thrust, forward thrust to this engine, pushing the thing backwards. But I'll figure that out when I actually get to flying the plane for the first test flight. I haven't had a chance to do that at all. Actually, in the wings, there is not even a real stock wing, so it's not even airworthy at all. Anyways, that's it for this engine. I think, yeah, that's it. And then other features of this engine test bed, just a few small fuel tanks. Not much really, just a quick test bed. And yeah, these are the variables for that engine. Engine 1, blah blah blah. I'm not sure. Yeah, I might have made a video on this. I'm not really sure anyway. So what was I? Cockpit Interior. Just a few. Oh, well, it was open here, but so we have the engine whatever. We have the engine start. Yeah, I just did that. So we have the engine start guide gauges things. So we have the engine start dials. We have the APU stuff. We have the fuel panel. So this is modeled off the 787 Dreamliner, but slightly modified. Like we have all the fuel pump. These are all just fuel tank pumps. Then we have some fuel dumping features. So left tank and right tank, or left wing and right wing group. And all this text here is like on pressure, which is for short for pressure. That will be modded with circuitry, so it only shows when certain things happen. Like let's say pressure will only show up when that specific pump is on, and the fuel is less than a certain quantity, there's just no fuel at all. And on text, that'll be on when the electrics are on and that particular button toggle is on. And then there's not really much else. I do know one thing I will have is like a camera with some small buttons somewhere in the interface, and that'll move you around the cockpit like a real flight sim, so you don't have to just have the two seats. You'll have one camera, and then you can move that wherever you like. That way I can zoom in on all the small, tiny, hard to reach features of this plane. There'll be a lot of them. They'll be coming in the next video because this video is actually going to be about the variables tutorial, well, part 1. So we have this cockpit. There are just 4 switches and 4 lights. Currently they just do nothing. They will activate 1, but that's just the default. And these lights are always on because that's their default too. The only thing I've done is just added a very quick tooltip and label, and then I just scaled and moved, like nudged lights into place. So what we'll be doing is I'll be showing you how to make, I'm not sure how to describe it, but it's a system where you have one switch, and then that switch must be on before this next switch can be flicked. Well, it can turn it on and off, but that will not activate this light unless this switch is on, and so on. When you get to switch 4, the other 3 have to be on in order for the switch 4 and its light to be activated. And the use cases for this are where you can have like a battery and then a few systems dependent on the battery. Or let's say in the case of a standard plane, you'll have the battery, and then you'll have maybe some avionics, which is like a system that just comes off the battery. And then another thing that relies directly on the battery is like all the lights, the nav lights, the landing lights, which can all be on their own independent switches, instead of just one activation group for everything. Or like one activation group for all the lights of the entire airplane. Or let's say we have battery, then we have to have the fuel tanks on, which require the battery to be on. Then we have our engine switch. I'm just going to say just a master switch that just turns the engine on and off, but that is not realistic anyway. And that will require 3 switches, each switch requiring the previous ones to be switched on. And this video is actually called Variables Tutorial, so I'm going to show you how the variable system works. So variables, which you can access by this button here, these variable setters. But the first thing you need to know is each line in this panel is not a variable. This is actually a variable setter, and the variable is automatically created if it is referred to in this or of any of these buttons or any input. So if you ever write a custom name for a variable, it's automatically created. It is not created in this panel. A variable is automatically created whenever it is referred to. For example, let's say I was to call a variable, let's say, battery, and the expression of, I don't know, just 1. And then in this one, we're trying to turn the battery off. Oh, no, here. These two would actually be constantly trying to overwrite the same variable, which is automatically created because I've referenced it here twice. Another note, variables are read from this panel, variable setters, top down. So the battery is trying to be on and then is trying to be off. And variable setters, or any variables in here, they are calculated or expressed every physics tick in SimplePlanes. So whenever there's like a tick or a new frame in the physics, or really any frame in the game or something, then this will be read, any expressions here will be calculated, and then that will be written to a variable. There are 2 other inputs here, priority and activator. So we have variable name, which just defines what the variable is called. The expression, which can be anywhere from just 1 to, let's say, my entire autopilot code from whatever video that was in the SWL10. And by the way, I will be making a refined autopilot that fixes all the flaws of the SWL10's autopilot in the SWL120. A video on that will be coming, I don't know, for a month or 2. Anyway, so you have variable name, the expression, priority, and activator, 4 inputs. So priority is, well, the priority of that particular variable setter. So let's say I want the priority of this one that turns the battery on, well, if the variable battery sets its value to on, I want this one to take priority over this one, battery 0. And by default, if the priority is not set in here, there's nothing typed in here, it'll default to 0. you're gonna have, and this also supports negative values like -1 or -2 or whatever. The activator. So let's say I have some code that writes some, I'm just gonna say engine. I'm just thinking of random words. So let's say I have this code that tells the engine to be 1 or really on, and this one that tells it to be 0 or off. And you can click these arrows to hide or show the priority and activator functions. So I want, and I could just do priority, but in the game, I want the engine to be on or off, and I want to be able to control that. Obviously, this is actually, I could just simply do that with a single line, but anyway, so the activator is whether or not that particular setter should be calculating code. So let's say this, I'm just going to say this, let's say this one is called time, but the activator, I'm just going to call this 10, but the activator is activate 1, which is just the activate 1 in the game, which is not a variable. It technically is, but it's something you can control in the game. And that tells the code to be calculating or just not be calculating at all, not writing to the variable. This one's going to be activate 2. And I'm just going to delete the battery ones because that's irrelevant at this time. So let's run the game, and I'll just, when I get in here, the debug expression function in the debug console is really useful. You can debug a variable, like basically you can write any line of funky trees code in this panel, and then you can see that displayed live, like it's updating in game. So debug expression, and I just write a variable name, but you could also write any funky trees code or anything. Note that you have to have quotes, unless it's a single word. So debug expression, engine, 0. And if I would activate activation group 1, and activation group 1, which is actually set to time, then that will write to the variable engine what the current time in game, and that's in game, not real life, the current time in game. And I'm recording this while editing this video, but I think it's important to note this is not like the in-game like day-night cycle time. It's the current time in seconds since the level is loaded, not the day-night cycle time. Like it's currently like 6 a.m. and a day-night cycle in SimplePlanes is 3 hours, so you can adjust that. But this is time in seconds since the level is loaded. And then when I deactivate that group, it'll stop. When I reactivate it, the timer will have actually advanced, and then they'll write it to here. Activation group 2 just writes that to that engine variable the number 10, which is the variable set in the variable setters panel. So these are 2 lines that write to the same variable when certain activation group is switched on. So now on to this 4 switches. So what we're going to do is we want to have it so switch 1 needs to be on for switch 2 to be on, and these 2 both need to be on for switch 3 to be on, so on until we can have this forever, but I'm just going to have 4 here. So let's just tackle the first idea of we want these 4 switches to output like on or off to a light. First thing I want to do is have these 4 writing to their own variables. Now I could do this with activation groups, but I find that it's actually good practice to just have it all in variables. Like activation groups could be useful, but I like to just have none because, in my opinion, variables are easy to work with, especially with complex cockpits and codes. In fact, the SWL10 has no activation groups utilized whatsoever. It just says variables. Anyway, so switch 1. First thing I want to do is take this off the activation group 1, which is the default. I'm just going to call it switch 1 like this. I'm also going to add the code interaction type. Now interaction type is how the switches interact with the light or the variable that it's ready to, which in this case is switch 1. I think I did a video or part of a video on this earlier. I'm just going to quickly say it. So interaction type, yeah. There are 3 functions: toggle, once, and continuous. Toggle just toggles the variable off or on with the value that I set, which is set by output value. By default this is 1, I just leave it at 1. So toggle is that. Once, if you click the switch or even hold it, for a single physics tick when you start holding it, the switch will write the output value, which is by default 1, to the variable. And then it'll just stop writing it to it. And if you click it again, it'll still try and write 1 to that variable. To get it back to 0, that variable, you have either a line of code in the variable setters that always tries to write that variable to be 0, or you can have a button or a switch or anything that somehow sets that to 0. Continuous seems once, except for as long as you're holding the switch, that the switch will try and write output value to the variable. And each of those functions has its own uses, but in this case we're going to use toggle. We're going to use that for all 4 switches, but I'll write that off camera. What we could do is we could have each of the switches write to the variable switch 2, switch 3, and so on, and then we could have each of these 4 lights read switch 1, switch 2, and so on. The problem with this, well, there's not really a problem, but if we want to have a detailed startup sequence, like switch 1 needs to be on for switch 2, and then so on, like I explained before, we want to have a specific thing. So we want to have, first of all, each of these switches to have its variable input. This is just a custom name, like we could just do a bunch of numbers, but I like to name them so I can easily find them when I'm looking for them later. The switch 1 input, and I'm going to do the same for all of these right now. So switch 2, I'm just going to cut this, and there we go. We're going to start back at switch 1. So what we're going to do is each of these switches has the variable name switch 1, but input after it. It doesn't have to be input, it can just be whatever you want, but the variable that's in the switch needs to be different to the final variable that light is going to display, or whatever system you want to have based on that. Like, let's say you have battery, but then you have avionics, and the avionics could be anything. Anyway, so you want to have a difference, some way, between the switch or button's variable output to the final variable that the switch or button is trying to activate. So what we're going to do now in the variable setters, we're going to remove the engine one, and we're going to add a variable called switch1. It could be electrics, could be anything. So switch1, in the expression here, we want switch1 to be switch1 input. Or let's say this is electrics, this could be battery input, and we can have multiple inputs to this one variable. Actually, it's not this variable, but switch1. Or let's say we want any one of 3 inputs. If even just one is on, then that variable will be on, or really 1. And that is pretty simple. Let's say we have switch 1 input plus switch 2 input, but we clamp it to clamper 1. This is so if it's above 1, then it's always kept at 1. If it's below 1, then it's always kept at 0. If it's anywhere between that, then that variable, that value is displayed. But for these purposes, we're just going to have switch 1 input. And then we're going to repeat, but we're not going to just do switch 2 input, but we're going to do switch 2 input times switch 1. So that way, switch 1 has to be on as well as the input. I'm just going to write a clamper 1 for just to be safe that it maintains between 0 and 1. Switch 2 input times switch 1. So switch 2 input can be on, but then switch 1 has to be on first before switch 2, the variable, can be 1. I want to do the same for switch 3 and 4 with the same idea of switch 3 input and then switch 4 input, except we're going to have them time the previous one, so switch 4 input times switch 3, then switch 2, and this is switch 1, this just one the input. Or this could be electrics, and this could be, actually this could be battery input, and then we could also have, let's say, either going ground power, so these are 2 both electric inputs, or engine alternators, which basically just generate electricity. And then this could be electric, so then this could be avionics, requiring the battery to be on, requiring any source of electrics to be on, or really this variable, switch 1, or which could be electrics. So the avionics have to be on, but only if the battery or electrics is on. And if you've been watching all of my videos so far, then you'll know this is what I do in the SWL10, in particular the electrics panel. And then hydraulics, that's how the engine starter switches work. Anyway, so in theory, what we do, actually, First, I need to have each of these beacon lights have its input be switch 1, and then so on. So switch 2 for this beacon light, and then so on for the other 2. And then we can load the level, and we can see what happens. So I'm just going to clear that expression. So, alright, so switch 1, that controls this beacon light indirectly, but it controls it with the switch. And then switch 2, any of these, we click them, but they don't turn on. But we turn on switch 1, and look, they turn on now. So this is what we're trying to achieve, and we could just rename this like this could be battery. Then we could have this could be maybe electrics master, so any source of electrics, turn all of that on or off. And then we could redirect the power to be maybe this could be avionics, this could be some lights, and then you could even add more. But I'm not going to do that because this is not a plane. This is a small cockpit test area. Actually, here's a really good example. This is a plane for someone that I've been installing my new startup sequence on, and you have the battery. This is using the same concept as before, battery. And then we have fuel, landing lights, and navigation lights. But if we turn the battery off, they'll turn off, and so does all this stuff on this information screen. Then to start the engine, we have ignition, which is another system based on the battery, and fuel. So the fuel battery and fuel have to be on. And then starter, which is actually this uses the input of once, the interaction type of once, which starts the engine just a bit. I'm just going to turn on parking brake. That's a simple one of variables and then some pistons. So, and then when I turn off the ignition, that for a bit of slightly advanced funky trees, writes a value of 0 to starter. So the starter input variable is then written as 0, thereby turning off the whole thing. Like if I was to just turn off the fuel for a bit, that starter one turns off. So I have to click it again. And then there's a few other things you can do with variables. Actually, there's many things, but there's a few more simple things. Yeah, I should probably disengage the parking brake. There we go, that's more like it. Like how I can have this adjustable trim panel. This doesn't enable to trim yet, but this is basically a digital source of trim, which could also have on the yokes buttons in virtual reality, but I'm not going to do that. So here's another good example of what you can use the variable setters for. So I don't have it loaded up yet, but let's say in the SWL-120's wings, so in the SWL-120's wings, currently the flaps are actually on an older system using activation groups from before the variables update. But let's say I had some flaps code, and then this is a really good example for the SWL-10 and soon to be the SWL-120 wings, but not right now. So let's say I had some flaps code, and all 1,000 rotators, but not 1,000, but all the many rotators in this flap system have this code. And let's say the code is slightly flawed, but I fix it like by a few numbers. And how am I supposed to change it in every single rotator and piston? Manually clicking it, separating all the wing bits accidentally. Oh no, I accidentally moved fuselage out of the way. Oh yeah, the undo button, that's really broken. And so basically I lose the whole wing, or really have to revert back to another version. But this could all be solved if I just have all these rotators and pistons read from the variable called flaps code, which isn't in here, but anyway. And I could change the one line of code in flaps code, which could then pretty much just update everything else, even though everything else just reads that one variable. And then that way I can store my code in variables. Or you can do a few other things, especially with the activator function. Like let's say in here you can have different things work based on if engine 1 is on, like how the front fan works, or some of the other engines in here, which took a lot of coding. Well, here's a really good system. So this is, I don't fully understand this yet. I kind of stole this from someone else, but I'm going to give credit. This is a system for the SWL-20. I need to actually build it into a real system. It's just a bunch of haphazardly placed things. But it's a system where you can store information for waypoints, like latitude and longitude or different waypoints. So you can type in something here, and this in itself is pretty cool. Then you hit this button, which is not calculate, that's just enter. I need to fix this up a tiny bit. And then you can enter in, let's say, this. You can click this button, and that code will be briefly written to another variable called waypoint 1 latitude, but something like that. Then you clear this, but it doesn't clear this, it only clears the display text. And then you write a different one, and then click this, enter, and you have this, a latitude and longitude for waypoint 1. And the final product is expected to be like a kind of GPS screen, where your waypoints appear on the screen based on what is input in this like screen here, but related variables. And then it'll automatically draw a line or flight path from and to each of these waypoints, or the different variables, on the screen. But there are a few bugs still, like let's say I keep writing number 5, it'll go up to 6, or like it's really weird, like it's a little bit bugged. Or like, yeah, here, every time I write a number greater than 4, it'll just round up to the next number. It's a little bit weird. Or how if I write 0, it won't register as 0 unless I do it like this. So I have to write a number greater than or at 10,000, which is obviously not really helpful, especially if I want to navigate any of the inner islands on this map. But the idea is there, and it's pretty useful and pretty cool. Or how here and here, this is another plane someone else created, and this has a new ILS feature. It's a different one completely to mine, where it has a simple algorithm, not this. This is like the algorithm, and then based on the frequency, using the same system I just demonstrated with the navigation system, not that, there's the seat, this here, this frequency, based on what that frequency is, any one of these many things are then entered into the ILS system, the algorithm, and are then used as the ILS system. I'm just going to demonstrate this, even though this is actually meant to be a tutorial video. Actually, I have no idea what the one for right airport is, but anyway, you enter something into here, and then it shows up in this thing, and I'm going to use this in the SWL-120's cockpit, like as in one of the displays. I will give credit, of course. But anyway, there's these triangles that show up and show you how to fly the plane, like how to glide into the airport or really fly it in. I'm hoping I can use this as well as Autopilot version 2.0. What am I doing? I'm not doing this. This plane is spiraling out of control. Come on, pull up, yes! Anyway, so, what was I going to say? Anyhow, when I go to edit this video, I'll probably do a voiceover or something. It may not seem like, but I completely forgot what I was talking about. Anyway, so what I was saying is I'm hoping to use the new ILS algorithm, as well as Autopilot version 2.0, to have a working auto land feature where you can just click a button and the ILS inputs, or the ILS values, will be fed into the autopilot system and the plane will land itself. So I'm not really sure how that's going to work just yet, because I haven't started working on Autopilot version 2.0. But that is one thing that I'll be probably making a video or two on. I just don't know when. Anyway, so that's going to be it for this video. In the next video, or the next installation of this variables tutorial, because I never know what video I'm going to make next. Because I think I'm going to make next level on 20 videos, and I go off and play Minecraft for about a week. Like, I'm not really sure. Anyway, so in the next video, well, the next SimplePlanes variables tutorial video, I'll be showing you, I'll be showing you something. I have no idea. And I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!